This meeting is being recorded, and so it is. Hey, everybody, welcome to events. So by the end of this here lesson, you should be able to explain how DOM events work and attach event listeners to DOM nodes. This is our success criteria. So actually, before I dive in on this, let's do a brain dump. I want everybody to take a couple minutes and write everything you know about events right now. And let's take 3 minutes for that. I want you to Slack it to me. Brain dump, everything you know about events, go. Another minute. All right, pencils down. Slack me what you got. Cool. So I'm seeing a lot of very good answers on this. The one thing that I see consistently missing from them, though, is that the event it doesn't come from the user interaction, at least not directly. It comes from the DOM element. The DOM element has the event. So let's see what that means. So if I look at my DOM tree, got my HTML node. HTML has a head and a body. Body has this header node. It has an H1 node and might have a nav node, which might have a UL node, which might have a bunch of LI nodes. So we write that HTML, but HTML is just a string. Remember that. It's just instructions on how to build the DOM. It's not the actual thing that our browser works with. It's instructions on how to build the thing that our browser works with. The thing our browser actually works with is this tree shit. Before I move on, any questions about that? We want to be super clear about that idea. That, we have this body, this header, says the nav, and so on. What your browser does is take these characters that you write like that and turn it into this. This is HTML. This is the DOM. So our HTML gets turned into the DOM. We have all these little nodes here. Crucial takeaway here. Our events, these happen on the nodes. The node has an event. Now, it's usually a user interaction that causes that event to fire on the node. It doesn't have to be, though. Things like DOM content loaded, that's an event. It fires on the document, which is, I think it's technically above this, but fires on that node. It doesn't have to necessarily be user-initiated things, although it often is. And then a few of you picked up on bubbling and capturing. I'm going to go ahead and say that, like, capturing, you don't need to worry about that much, not in this program. It has some uses, but bubbling is really the one that you want to be careful about. So if I have, let's say, a click event, I'll show you one step back. Let's say I click on one of these LIs. The way the bubbling works is, all right, well, that LI is inside the UL, which is inside the nav, which is inside the header, which is inside the body, which is inside the document. That means if I click on the LI, I've also clicked on the UL, which means I've also clicked on the nav, which means I've also clicked on the header, which means I also clicked on the body, which means I also clicked on the document. That's how bubbling works. One after the other, each of these nodes ends up getting that same event. Now, another thing about events. This is one of the reasons that people don't like events, like hoity-toity engineers. They're not like, like it's two things, really. It's a name, and it's an event object. So this name is the part that people don't like because it's just a string. Click, the click event, is just an event with the string name of click. And so if you're listening for an event on one of these, you're saying, hey, if any event bubbles up through here that has the name click, I want this function to fire. And the thing that gets passed into that function is the event object. Has details about how was it triggered, what was the original thing that this was on, where was the mouse when this event fired, like a bunch of stuff like that. And that's events. Ask me some questions.
So when you click on something, say on the list item, and it bubbles up, it's only going to trigger other events of the same type, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so if nav is listening for mouse over, that doesn't fire when you, because you clicked on the LI. But yeah, you could have a click listener on the LI, the UL, the nav, not the header, and then the body. Each of those can have click listeners if you want.
So what if you've got like several events of the same type, and you want some of them to fire, but then like others you don't? That's when you have to use that suppressor thing, right? That stop propagation or whatever it is.
Not necessarily. That might be one solution to it, but also if you can conceive of how are you going to differentiate from like when it should fire versus when it should not fire? If you can write that as an if statement, the event listener can go, and then in that event handler, you're going, all right, is this condition true? Nah, that's not true. Just move on. You can do it that way too.
Okay.
Okay, so to an extent, I understand why bubbling makes sense. Why does it happen? Why would you want it to happen?
Sure. So take a second to visualize what this DOM would look like on a page. So we've got a header. It's got an H1 in it. It's got a nav. We have some list items that are like our actual links to navigate. All right. Let's say I want something to happen if I click anywhere in the header. Well, how would that work? Because you're probably also clicking on one of these things in the process of clicking on something that's in the header. So, like, if I clicked on this LI, I technically also clicked on the header. That's why it bubbles.
So it's built in there to allow for that functionality by default, and then you just have to specify if you don't want that to happen? Correct.
So another way to think of it would be, if we draw this out visually, all right, there's the header, this is the H1, this is the nav, this is the UL, these are the LIs. If I click on this, I also clicked on this and this because it's inside of it. Bubbling allows us to control the order of those things. So I can look at that LI, actually it's also, I also clicked on this. I can say, all right, does this LI want to handle it? Cool. Does this want to handle it? Does this want to handle it? Does this want to handle it? Gives us the flexibility to control how those get handled. And like Lynn was mentioning, stop propagation. You can also say, oh, and by the way, once we get to here, it shouldn't actually keep bubbling. You can tell it to stop doing that. And then like we alluded to capturing earlier. Capturing goes the other direction. You can say, I want it to get to here and then not keep on going to the actual thing that fired the event. That's way more rare, and it's not important to me if you know that right now. But bubbling is like your bread and butter working with events.
Okay, so to that end, you got your nav bar, right? I click a link on it. What would the use case be for me wanting it to be executed in the container?
Cool. So that's the thing called event delegation. All right, so I've got these 3 links in here. But let's say it wasn't just 3. Let's say it was any arbitrary number of elements. Let's say it's things that I can dynamically add and remove and like all that kind of stuff, right? So what if I want an event to fire when you click on any one of those? All right. Well, when I dynamically add something to that list, I also need to add the event handler to it when I add it. That's, first of all, super awkward. And second, very inefficient. Because like event listeners are cheap, but they're not free. And so if I have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of things on this list, and I have to add an event listener for every single one of them, it's kind of gnarly. What I can do instead is put one event listener on their shared container. And then whenever the event bubbles up to that, I can go, oh, by the way, which one of you actually fired the event? And then write one function to handle that. That's called event delegation.
Gotcha. So like Facebook, I've got a list of jobs.
Yep.
I can add as many as I want. If you click one, it's always going to go to that jobs page, but that link does not say to do that.
Correct.
Okay.
The container says to do that.
It just says, cool, what got clicked, got it, go there.
Yep. So you could also throw all your event listeners just on the document and like inspect the node for that. But then you just end up with a gnarly switch statement or something of how you want all those events handled. But shit, even that's like a valid architecture pattern called event busing. It's really common when you have a huge sprawling application that's like in a bunch of different pieces, but they need to be able to talk to each other. So you have this one like shared node that's called an event bus, and everything ends up bubbling to that, and everything can like, and that thing can dispatch all sorts of different actions as a response to that. All right, back to the matter at hand. We want to be able to explain how DOM events work. What remaining questions do you have about how DOM events work? So these are the different kinds of events that can fire on your page. And I'm pulling this up to like highlight that it's not just user interactions. Like this is a great one. You can have event listeners for when you're when the connection goes offline. I tried to load some script or something like that, but it errored out. So you could throw an error message on the page. You're listening for that error thing, that error fires. You throw something on the page going like, sorry, failed to load a script. Try refreshing. Focus and blur, these are pretty common. So focusing something is, you can do that a few different ways. Clicking on something often focuses it, but think about like forms. So if I go to like add a video, and starting to get a lot of videos on this page, going a little slower every day. All right, so I go over here. Right now, nothing on the page is focused. Oh, see how that line thickened? It's because that input is focused. I'm going to hit tab, and it's going to focus the next one. Now that's focused. And the thing that I just left is blurred. Blurring is I just lost focus. And then I click on that, that blurs, this gets focus. So the blur event fires on this DOM node, and the focus event fires on this DOM node. And then like you have this about to receive and about to lose. Those happen right before focus and blur. So you can even like stage changes. Resizing, you can like, if a user resizes their browser, that's an event. It fires on the window object. Like if you ever try to like copy and paste something with Control C in Sheets, like Google Sheets. All right, so I go over here and I try to Control C. Oops, stop it, like this. Why is it letting me do that? That's the one that it won't let me do. Shit. Is it that? Maybe if there's something in it. There's a warning that it'll give you about using your copy and paste commands. Maybe it's on Macs. It goes, sorry, go ahead and use the fucking whatever thing. Is it this? It's not it either. Anyway, those are events. You can listen for a user doing those and then like have your own behavior that responds to that. Same thing with pressing keys on the keyboard. And then these are the ones, this is our bread and butter right here. Mouse enter is like you moved your mouse into a DOM node. Mouse leave or mouse out is you left the DOM node. Clicking, highlighting text, that's an event. Using your scroll wheel, drag and drop, all of these things are events. Events are where like the interactive application kind of part of the web. So that's how that happens. More questions about DOM nodes?
I feel like I don't have enough examples in my mind of like how this is used often in the real world. Mm-hmm. In my head, it's like, you know, a click event, that seems like something that happen a lot. Yeah. A lot of the other effects, they seem kind of like flashy that you wouldn't necessarily use very often. You'd use maybe in a very specific case.
Sure.
I don't know what my question is here, but I don't know. I guess I don't feel like I have a really good idea of like what's something that uses it's like on every website or on most pages you would put this type of thing in.
That's a great question. This. So in Mod 3 and for the rest of your career, you're probably not going to use method in action on forms. Instead, what you're going to use is the forms submit event. And you're going to listen for that event, and then you're going to handle it all manually. When you're adding a new heroine to your list, you don't actually use the default browser form submission thing. That's like, it's one of two lies that we told you in Mod 2. What you actually do is listen for the submit event and then send a fetch post request to add it. And yeah, damn near every website is probably going to have something kind of like that. These keys, that's also like relatively common. So if you want to have any kind of keyboard navigation for your site, or like how in Gmail, you can like press C and it like opens up the compose window. All that stuff is handled with key events.
Are there more key events than what's just listed here?
No, it's just these. So what you do is that event object that gets passed into your handler will tell you which key was pressed. So you need to test for that. You go, okay, I know a key was pressed, and it has both of them, down and up, and also like being held down. So those are the 3 different ways you can press a key, either immediately when I hit it, or when I let go of the key, or when I'm holding the key down. And then when your event handler fires, it goes, okay, event.target.keycode, is it 37? Is it 38? And all of those correspond to like character codes.
Okay, thank you.
It seems like something that would be useful if you're making like a game for navigation or different things. Is that something that would be used outside of that realm commonly?
Oh yeah, like I said, Gmail. I'm a sucker for Gmail shortcuts.
Yeah.
I use them all over the place there. Or like over here, the reason that I can highlight this cell and do a Control-C and it puts the thing, that's all event listening.
Okay.
So like things that are true applications, not just websites, rely very heavily on a lot of these kinds of things.
Okay, yeah.
Or shoot, how about this menu up here? There's no like built-in HTML elements for that. The fact that I hover over that and it changes color, that's actually probably CSS, but even being able to do that with CSS is very new. You used to have to do that with JavaScript. And the fact that I click on that and this other DOM element shows up on the page, that's a click listener. And then when I hover over these, that's absolutely a mouse in event. When I mouse over this DOM node, then it adds this thing to the page. All of this is being handled with events. Pretty cool, huh?
And so to answer Matt's question, basic navigation is largely handled by events.
Like this very menu-driven navigation is driven by events. You can also have stuff like, if I go to my website, this is navigation. Although shit, actually this is handled with events too, now that I think about it. So what happens here is this whole thing is just one long vertical page. And so what I do is when I click on this about, that just scrolls me down to there. That's with events. So I'll show you the actual code for that too. All right, so give this main. Yeah, perfect. So I added this scroll behavior to my about link. So my about link is right here. It's got that class of about-link. I'm calling this little add scroll behavior helper that I made. And so what this does is it takes in the thing that I'm clicking on. It looks up where I'm trying to go. So I'm trying to go to something that has this, this anchor, this ID on it. So that's going to end up being that. I want to go from, I want to attach an event listener to about link that when it's clicked on is going to take me to the thing with that ID. So I look up both of those elements, and so long as they both exist, then I add a click event listener to it. And then this thing right there makes it so that it actually goes in my history, so that like I'm on about right now, but I can click back and end up right back where I was. But you have to like, it's not a real navigation, so you have to handle all that manually. And then I do a smooth scroll into view for that target element. All that's handled with events. And then like this shit here, that's a Safari fallback because Safari doesn't have smooth scrolling. So if this errors out because because it can't handle that, then it just does that one, which is how Safari handles it. More questions about how events work?
Do you have any familiarity with the original old school RuneScape that was made all in Java?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I'm just speculating that that must be how that worked then.
Yeah, the event spec, not all parts of JavaScript are that old. In fact, almost all the ones we use now are relatively recent. Events go back a long ways, though. All right, before I find out what you know about how DOM events work, I want to practice this a little bit with the second objective, attaching event listeners to DOM nodes. So I'm going to make a web page, and I want you to not follow along with this. I'll give you the code, promise. So we're going to call this event practice. And it's going to have an index.html, and it's going to have an app.js. Going to make a valid HTML document. Come on.
Does your editor not have a shortcut for this, or do you choose not to do it for a reason?
Choose not to do. Well, the thing you're talking about is snippets, and they exist in Vim. I don't like them. They get in the way of like all of my other plugins. So outside of these lessons, I pretty much never. I mean, you do this once per project, so I don't worry about it that much.
Got it.
And also, I want to constantly remind you what the components of valid HTML are. It's all this. Got to have a character set. You got to have a title. Super easy to forget. And you have to have a doc type. All right. So I'll call this events. And I'm going to throw a form on here too. Oh, perfect. I got it. I know what we're going to do. All right. So what we want to do is we want to make something where we can enter pets into these forms and they get added to this every time we do it. No backend, doing this pure client-side DOM manipulation. All right, so there's the HTML. I want to sanity check myself. Make sure that it worked. Hey, everything's there. So we want this, if I type Bixby in here, it doesn't reload the page and put Bixby up in the URL. I want it to just add a new DOM element to the page here. So if I wanted to do such a thing, then I'm going to need this pets UL. Like so. And then I want a submit listener on this form element, which means that I need the DOM node for the form.
It's pets, not dogs.
Oh, thank you. Good catch. I want to get, I can just say form at this point because I only have one of them. Okay, so I have this DOM node and I have this DOM node. You add the event listener to the DOM node. Big takeaway from this. So we call add event listener on the DOM node. And this takes 2 arguments. What's the name of the event we're listening for? What is the function you want me to run when that happens? So I want to listen for the submit event, and I want a function to fire whenever that happens. That function is going to be passed an argument. You can call it whatever. Sometimes they call it EVT. You know how I feel about fucking variable names like that. Just call it what it is. It's called an event. This one in particular is special because the browser has default behavior for that. When we submit a form, it fires off an HTTP request somewhere and like does all that stuff, right? It's one you'll get real used to. You want to prevent that default behavior. Event.target, that's going to be the DOM node that this thing fired on. That's like the form. It's another one that you use a lot. But actually, let's take a look at the event. All right, so if I take a look over at the console here, I put Bixby in, because I'm preventing the default behavior, it doesn't try to reload the page or anything anymore. And I get this event that has all this stuff when it was clicked. Whether or not this particular kind of event bubbles, not all of them do, most of them do. This is like whether or not it's being bubbled or captured. Target, hey, that's our form thing. And then we can look on this form and we can do things like, all right, well, do you have children? I do. I've got my input, I've got this, and I can read the values out of them and all that kind of stuff. Events. I'm actually going to show you a better way to do this one of these days, but for right now, let's say I take in the event, the input also. Whenever this fires, I want to get input.value, whatever is currently in the form. And then I want to make a DOM node, const. And I'll set its text content equal to the pet name. And then I'm going to add the LI to the UL. See if that works. All right, shoe money to Bixby. Hey, there he is. Hey. Ta-da! And there is This is all stuff we know how to do. We know how to get DOM elements. We know how to like read things out of them. We know how to make elements. We know how to set text on them. We know how to add them to the page. The only new thing is we're listening for an event called submit, and we're passing this function in. And since it's a form, and forms have default behavior, we have to prevent it.
Okay, so you showed us a big long list of different events that can happen. Is there a particular reason that we choose to, I guess I'd say like reskin submit rather than using something that might be more apropos?
So the reason we're reskinning submit is that, well, here's an example that I see a lot. People will put a click listener on this button instead. Okay, well, this is also supposed to work if I type this out and hit the enter key. I didn't click on the button, but I submitted the form. Semantically, what I'm still doing is filling out a form. That's why we're overriding the behavior. The semantics haven't changed.
So that's like a user experience kind of. Gotcha.
Correct. And so, of course, you could also put in a key down handler that listens for the enter key, but at some point, you're just reinventing the wheel. This stuff already exists. Other questions about anything I did? One more thing I'll show you. Since that second argument to add event listener is a function, can also be a declared function. We call that submit handler, takes in an event. Just move all this stuff in here. Like that. Exact same thing. Cool, your turn. So I'm going to delete all of that, and I'm going to give you all this code. I'm going to throw it in the Zoom link for this lesson. Nope, didn't work. Hang on. Nope, come on. Go. There we go. All right, so make an HTML page that has the code that I just posted, make an app.js file, and see if you can do what I did. You make it so that when you fill out the form, it adds the thing to the page. Go. Another minute. All right. If you would be so kind as to Slack me the contents of your JavaScript file, whether or not you got it working, I just want to see how far you got. Fire it off. Still waiting on a couple. Okay. Oh, thank you, Indiana. Very nice. So first thing, straight up mod 2 stuff. And a lot of people got this. We just need to get the elements, the DOM nodes. So we can grab the form. Oops, not create, come on. Query selector. So we want the form, we want the input, and we want the pets UL. Cool, most people got this far. And then if I want to listen for the form's submit event, Mr. Navoy, what should I do?
Add the submit listener to input.
Oh, not to input.
Oh, to the form.
The
Right.
form has a submit event. The input doesn't have a submit event.
Okay.
The submit button doesn't have a submit event. The entire form does. So I want to listen for the submit event. What's the second argument, Michael?
The function.
Yeah. And what gets passed into that function?
The event.
The event object. Okay. So we could write this with the function keyword. We could write it as an arrow function. We can write it as a first class function or declaring it outside of it. All of it's legit, works the exact same way. All right. So this is as far as most people got. One thing that we have to do with form submit events, you have to prevent the default behavior of the browser. And so the way that you do that is event.prevent default. That's going to come up over and over and over again, including on the code challenge. We don't need to do that for most click events. We don't need to do that for a ton of stuff. Most stuff doesn't have default browser behavior. Form submissions do. All right. So then I probably want the thing that I typed in. So Lynn, how would I do that?
You get the value
Yeah, of what?
of the input field where the person typed it in. And
Very nice. So I'm going to grab that value. Ben, what do I do next?
Let's see. You can create the element, set its value.
And then Ben, what do I do now?
Append it.
That's it. Done. See if it works. There we go. Okay, one more. So we can leave all this up. You don't have it, don't worry about it. Now I want you to add a click listener to that H1. Write these out. So when somebody clicks on the H1, an alert should pop up and go, ow! Give it a shot. Go. All right, Slack me what you got. Cool, very nice. So, correct answer. We get the H1 DOM node. We attach an event listener to it. We want clicks. Pass a function that we want to happen every time the H1 DOM node gets clicked on. We say, ow. See if it works. Ow. Ta-da. So, a couple things. Get back here. There we go. Couple things. One is that we definitely don't need to prevent default on here because there was no default behavior. Clicking on just a random DOM element, the browser doesn't do anything by default. So we don't need to prevent it. Another thing, alerts, they're kind of rare. You mostly use them in like smoke testing like this. They used to get used like in the 90s a lot more. But it's not a DOM element. You don't need to make it as a separate DOM element. You just call it as a function like this. Also, you can do this by saying something like, I'll do it this way. I'll make a function called sayOw that just does this. And then we could make that a first class function like so. That also works. Now, if you do something like, I think it's lowercase c, maybe, on click. You can do that, and that technically works. Don't do this though. We don't want to do any like JavaScript-y kinds of things in our HTML. Same reason we don't want to do styling in our HTML. We don't want our HTML to have to know about our JavaScript. So instead, we use add event listener.
Kyle, can you remind me what you mean by a first class function?
Absolutely. A first class function is a function that we can use like any variable. We can save it in a variable. We can pass it into a function. We can return it from a function. It's not any different than a string or an object or a Boolean or anything else. So to wit, I'm using this like a first class function. I'm passing it as a variable into the add event listener method call. So if you're like, well, why does that need a fancy name? Think about how we would do this in Ruby. You can't save a method in a Ruby object as a variable. That doesn't even make any sense. We can't pass a method into another method call in Ruby. How would that even work? You notice that like in Ruby, because of that, you don't even need the parentheses. If I just do some object dot some method, or I guess some method in Ruby, that just calls it. I don't need to put the parentheses on it. The reason that couldn't work in JavaScript is I might want to save the definition of that function in a variable somewhere. Like that. That would never happen to Ruby. Doesn't happen in any object-oriented languages, actually. And the reason is because JavaScript has first-class functions and object-oriented languages generally don't. But it lets us do cool things like this. Anything else? Cool. To wrap up, I'd like you to Slack me your explanation of how DOM events work. You go to a really lame party, and they're like, hey, so I hear you're a programmer now. Explain how DOM events work. What are you going to say when this very likely event happens? 3 minutes, go. All right, Slack me what you got. And yeah, it's hard to put this shit into words, isn't it? That's why we're practicing. It is not the case also that like you understand how to put something into words and then you get how it works. You get how it works way before you're able to like wrestle it into words. Wrestling into words is like a level 2 kind of thing. Good answers. Outstanding answer, Gerald. Okay, beautiful. So our objective was to explain how DOM events work and attach event listeners on DOM nodes. We did pretty damn good, gang. So any questions before we wrap?
One quick one, Kyle.
Mm-hmm.
The behavior smooth that you had on your site when you were going to a different element,
Mm-hmm.
is that a piece of CSS or JavaScript?
That's JavaScript.
Okay.
You're controlling the scrolling in the browser, and it can either jump there or it can gradually go there. But it's a browser specific, so meaning like Safari doesn't have it, but all the other browsers do. Thing that you can call.
Gotcha. So you just have like a nice transition to that action.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Oh, one other thing that I did want to mention though is that the way that this event works here, we're not calling this event handler on the event. We are passing the event into this handler. The browser is passing that into the handler. Important distinction. Any other questions?
Are you going to toss us that JS code too?
Why not?
Thank you.
What else?
Just a kind of a wondering thought. So Bootstrap has that jump functionality already written into it with the hashtag where it jumps onto a section. I imagine it maybe has a smooth thing too. I don't know, but like bigger picture, a lot of this stuff that we're writing, I'm trying to think of like how often we'll actually write it or how much it'll be in frameworks or libraries. Yeah.
So the jump thing is a browser abstraction. It's essentially the thing that I just did on my site where, all right, if the browser supports it, do this. Otherwise, do this. You can just wrap that in a jump thing. Also, navigating directly to an anchor, that's browser behavior. You don't even need JavaScript for that. Like if I have something like ID main heading, I can do an anchor down here that goes to main heading. Ta-da! No JavaScript needed. That works out of the box, but it doesn't do that smooth behavior.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, maybe that's what I did because I used Bootstrap, but maybe I just did it in the browser or in the HTML here. Yeah.
And then, sorry, the second part of your question was, oh, how often do you like actually write this by hand? A lot.
That was just kind of like the example for the stuff that we're writing here, event listeners and stuff like that. You still would write a lot of event listeners by hand. That's not something that's going to be like often frameworked out.
No, and in fact, like, God, I was gonna say the good frameworks, even the bad frameworks, you don't work directly with the DOM in a front-end framework. That's the entire point of them. They abstract out the DOM for you. However, the thing you're doing in the abstraction is exactly the same with events. I'll show you. So if I look at some React thing, let's see, does this have one? Just those ones, huh? Let's see. These. Perfect. So here's a click listener. And you do like the on-click thing rather than add event listener, but otherwise it works exactly the same. And this thing is going to get an event passed into it, and you can prevent default on it, and like all that stuff works exactly the same. Or in Vue, let's see, do I have a form? Ah, perfect. Hey, what do you know? On card change, when should that happen? That's how you would do the event handler there. But it's effectively the exact same thing. This is like saying add event listener, the name of the event is change, and on card changes the function you want to call. It's the exact same concepts in all of these things. And even like I didn't use a front-end framework on my personal website. That would have been stupid. Like it just doesn't need it. So I use DOM event listeners directly. Not all of these things like get used in production software. This stuff absolutely does. Other questions?
Is that handlebars you have in there?
Wow. It's handlebars-esque. It looks like handlebars. It's Vue's like a templating system. But it looks a lot like handlebars and works very similar. But like in handlebars, you're not allowed to put logic inside of a template. You can absolutely do that in these. So like any of these things could just have arbitrary logic in them. So I could also make that something like some string plus. So I could do like a template string or something like that. You're not allowed to do that in handlebars. Handlebars is only the variables you pass in, only the functions you pass in. And there's a lot of good reasons for doing that. But Vue's templates let you do just arbitrary fucking JavaScript absolutely everywhere. React does too. I think both of them are terrible ideas, but whatever. Nobody wants to learn anything. Everybody wants to just be able to do whatever they want, wherever they want. All right. Other questions? Bye-bye, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep. Cheers.